Hello strategy gaming enthusiasts, my name is AlzaboHD. CK3 has just released the largest update in its 3-year history and added all of Asia, so it's only natural we'll play an Italian man headed for Chinese lands. In today's challenge video, we will tell the true story of Marco Polo and how one man schemed, subjugated, and sashayed his way into the court of Cathay. This account of Hantalian history takes our homeless hero from the swamps of Venice to the heights of Imperial hegemony, and you can support me by picking up the All Under Heaven DLC via the link below. You and your 20 closest concubines can also play CK3 for free on Steam from this Thursday to next Monday. Without further ado, it's time to begin our story in 1178 AD with the most famous merchant marauder in all of history. Marco Polo potentially appears as an event character in the late game, but we'll play as him earlier by creating a custom landless adventurer. Here at AlzaboHD, we strive for historical accuracy, and we'll copy his coat of arms that conformed with bird law, grant him his medieval mullet, and we'll give him some of the less overpowered traits that would have appeared in a normal campaign. With Iron Man selected, we can get started right away by renaming his pikes of Polo to the Merchants of Venice, selecting the destination lifestyle focus for plentiful prestige, and hiding his follicular folly with Santa Claus style. If you believe in ancient Wikipedia theory, he first voyaged to Acre, so we'll make him an explorer and set sail for the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Marco and his merchants were a boat to change the course of history and were eager to trade, raid, and pillage, and in 7 months of sailing arrived in Acre. He and the boys made bread by escorting emissaries, extorting local lords and ladies, he believed in equality, and stole supplies from a hunchbacked hijabi to take on his journey. The publicly published prophecies foretold a dromedary drive to Hormuz, and so in 1179 it was time for Marco to embark through caliphal lands in his quest towards the Silk Road and subjugating Chinese civilization. Arabian wolves descended upon our camel company and wounded our Polo protagonist. We'll pretend for a minute that these horses have humps, and Marco was well prepared upon his arrival in Hormuz. He made money here as an accountant, performed in a play which was a massive failure, and decided to travel to a Silk Road market far to the north in Uzbekistan. Every landmark inspired prestige, and Marco procured trinkets that he exchanged for donkey milk and cheese. Escorting bards into Baghdad provided the money needed to hire the first unit of his private military company, and it was high time to travel to Afghanistan, a land of dysentery and dank reefer. Our merchants thus headed eastwards and into the heart of Kabul, where Polo partied in exchange for prestige, threatened peasants violently for provisions, and continued to amass a personal army. Alexander the Great had crossed the Indus River Valley 1500 years before, but Marco would go further and was eager to work in Tibet and the Tarim Basin. During these travels, Marco wrote a novel in vulgar Latin, and thankfully the locals of He apparently spoke spaghetti. Further to the east, the Jin and Song dynasties ruled over a fragmented China, and as a master debater and trader, Mr. Milione and his 17,000 soldiers set out to Sichuan for spices and free real estate. Over a decade of travel had brought our landless lad into the heart of China, and Marco wasted no time in selling books that no one could read, and met a maiden he made into a jester. Humiliating women was fun and a natural source of stress relief, and with his nerves calmed, Polo set out for the imperial capital to sit in a bureaucratic examination. This unwashed brute of a man spoke not a word of Putonghua, and thus had his stooges teach him in the ways of Confucius, but even at that he was caught plagiarizing. He hired a random hand to give him a hand and to take the test for him, succeeding not once but 3 times in a row, and somehow scored the 3rd most promising scholar despite not taking a shower since Venice and not speaking the language. Unfortunately, none of this mattered as his camp was not within the Song dynasty, but he did steal some court clothing as compensation. Polo was pissed that his hard work of cheating reaped no reward and vowed revenge upon the emperor, but for now was forced to return to Chang'an, where he was exalted among men. The Northern Jin dynasty offered Marco more opportunities, and he spent his youth visiting temples for prestige, collecting protection payments from Manchurians, and begging money from Catholic orders 10,000 kilometers away. It had been over 14 years of life on the road, and Polo had seen wondrous things and dedicated yet another book that no local could read. But this time he received a stream of lifestyle knowledge and used this to hire turtle nipple armormen. The Jurchen Jin dynasty was under attack, and flush with Taobao cash, Marco used this opportunity to strengthen his private military company. Even the Pope sanctioned a Catholic invasion of the lands of Cathay, and our Venetian made preparations to exploit the Emperor's vulnerability. Only one task remained before the war, and that was smuggling hash from Kabul with high-stakes bartering. Dirty ducats thus poured into the treasury from every province Marco passed through, and by the time he returned to China, he was flush with the funds needed to field almost 4,000 men at arms. Fortunately for our cheating, dealing, and woman-wheeling hero, Genghis Khan and his equestrian hordes rose from obscurity in 1200 AD, and according to both Netflix and the Changeable Chronicles, the Mongolians loved Marco Polo. This tragedy under heaven was an opportunity to forge a macaroni municipality, and Marco's status as a legendary figure with a private army of 4,000 men meant big trouble in Little China. His future foe had 16,000 bannermen, but was engaged in a forefront war, meaning that our merchant of Venice could make an offer the Jurchen Jin dynasty couldn't refuse. While he could have claimed a far larger territory, spontaneous combustion meant that Marco had to set his sights on the smaller duchy of Kanjing, as it was a race against time. Thus it was in 1201 AD that his Italian army arrived south of Beijing, breached the walls of Dezhu, and laid siege to the canton's capital of Guangzhou. Marco's status as a landless lad let him continue to recruit Han soldiers to fill attrition, functionally making his army immortal and self-replenishing. The occupation of Yangtze County meant Polo was 2 for 3, and by 1203, the capital of Qingqi was captured, leading to peace, independence, and a duchy in a war that lasted only 2 years. Unfortunately, Di Zhao didn't join Bella Ciao, but with Cengiz horsing around, our ill-Italian had no choice but to bend the knee to the horse owner association of his new neighborhood. Submission to the Khan rewarded Duke Marco with the position of spy master of the Mongolian Empire, which by 1 week later now included half of Asia. The Prince of Polo thus set out to solidify his precarious position by marrying Bojan, an intelligent Kyrgyz queen. The union between Italy and the horse girl hegemony culminated in Marco adopting Eastern attire and finding a Mongolian teacher, but his duchy was divided and it was time to take the reins of destiny. Mongolian poetry gave Polo poet potential. Our Duke Khan now speak the language of his liege, and the mounting of his maiden resulted in pregnancy, but it wasn't meant to be. 3 years of war resulted in a realm reunited, and Marco celebrated by pounding horse milk vodka with the boys. As a Catholic ruler, he then set out to claim the Duchy of Yuzo, paid to pray his crimes away, and kneeled before the empty throne of his vassal king in Hebei. That said, Marco secretly believed in no kings and forged his own crown, laid claim to all of the Duchy of Yuzhou, and declared war for Beijing in 1209 AD, irrevocably changing the course of Chinese history. No one said this would be easy, and Marco's direct liege, the commandant of Hebei, used this new opportunity to demand the revocation of Dizhao, which Marco declined without pretense of civility. With 2 wars now on his doorstep, our Duke found himself in dire straits, but Marco wasn't a quitter and single-handedly captured his commandant in battle, thus deposing him in favor of his incompetent intendant and sterile son. The fight for Marco's capital county resulted in overwhelming victory, such that the land adopted fettuccine alfredo, and China descended into its division era. Only an architect's salary could impregnate his Kyrgyz wife, and in 1213, Marco gave birth to his firstborn daughter and heir, Valentina. In a little under 5 years, Kanjing tripled in size, and the stress of his success meant our Duke became a fan of fresh air and exercise. The only thing left to do was to expand and consolidate his lands under heaven, and in 1214, war was waged for autonomy and the Duchy of Changde. Marco's proud nature produced twin progeny and a sterile son and heir. Heaven was brought to earth in the Battle of Shanghai, which awarded him another duchy, and several years of war resulted in the second deposition of his so-called liege. Marco wouldn't allow his medieval manager to intervene any longer, and this time independence would mean a direct line to the Khan himself. The neighboring commandant, a kingdom-level title, was weak and powerless to defend himself against our Penne polity, and while Marco was ostensibly busy in battle, he still had the time to impregnate an ugly witch Jilf, which led to instant court condemnation. Fortunately, his affinity at military strategy proved a sufficient distraction from his infidelity, and in 1222, Marco scored a decisive victory, and the Yuezhi king conceded his throne, thus awarding Marco his first kingdom-level title and the ability to crown himself king under Khan. As a newly crowned king, Marco's first priority would be to get a proper pepperoni pizza to go along with his vulgar Latin court vocabulary. An upcoming royal coronation meant that his wardrobe needed an upglow, and the entire family celebrated the fact Genghis Khan awarded them with vassal after vassal. Marco was the very image of a king, and swore an oath to expand the realm, renamed his kingdom Daqin in honor of the ancient name China called the Roman Empire, and retitled his capital Poljing in honor of himself. He next decreed that the Chinese folk faith of Daozhu would be that of his court, so that he could capture concubines and sacrifice nothing to please his Sino-subject population. Polo's oath of expansion necessitated his neighbors' cooperation, and in under 1 year, the Duchy of Zhiqing was under Daqin rule, and her lands given to fellow Cisalpine Confucian courtiers. With his oath fulfilled, Marco traveled across the land, praying far and wide, chaining pilgrimage after pilgrimage to attain the Confucian power inside. Our monarch of Venice was by now 69 and feeling fine, ingested iron lead for vitality, and conquered Hebei, because the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. Genghis Khan was dead, and his once great empire divided between Yuan and Mongolia. This event also meant a promotion, as Marco found himself appointed Grand Chancellor of the Yuan dynasty and newly converted into a meritocratic realm. His new fortunes and administrative divisions meant that the Polo dynasty now had an estate to enrich and Vietnamese neighbors to invade, and in 1227, Mr. Milione married his daughter to the lords of Kambucha to turn the tide of battle. Over 36,000 of his soldiers thus waged war against 23,000 Vietnamese and carpet-sieged the southern state with ease. With the birth of Marco III, House Polo was now a powerful family within the Yuan Empire, and victory in the Battle of Yongchu meant 3 new crowns came Rome safely and swiftly. The Yuan Emperor had foolishly started 2 wars and became vulnerable to independence factions, of which Marco was leader. So in 1229, it was time for a change in management, and Daqin, along with a dozen unloyal subjects, declared war to liberate their lands from the crispy Khans. The primary Polo priority would be to take the Yuan capital of Chang'an, conveniently located across the borderlands, but between our lands lay a pestilence of Mongolian measles. The doors of Poljing slammed shut to protect the royal family, but Marco and his wife were infected, his son Marco III boiled away, and his second daughter Bernadetta fell and couldn't get up. Thankfully, the Italian insurgent attained immunity and swore to avenge his family from the Mongolian malady and Yuan dynasty, and captured his liege's capital in 1230 AD. The longest river in China then decided it was a good time to flood, felling hundreds of Marco's subjects and washing away his wife's face. Early military victories were followed by a tragic loss of 10,000 Roman soldiers in the Battle of Tongzhou and the massacre of Marco's bannermen in Baozhou. It took 2 years of hiring thousands of mercenaries before the Yuan dynasty's armies were beaten from Daqin lands, and a new plan would be needed to reverse the war score and win freedom for Polo's polity. Even with victory after victory, our war score was -70 and drilling towards the depths of dissolution, so Marco lifted some weights to become wholly committed to his health and invaded Korea to find and capture the enemy emperor. Only a Hail Mary victory saved him from -100 war score and certain defeat, and the Mongolians were pursued and hunted across Manchuria, culminating in the Battle of Bolo Bao, where the Yuan Emperor was captured and brought face to mace with Marco. Our king and every vassal allied with Roman China thus won liberty after more than 7 years of war, and our former lieges' lengthy lands exploded into little Yuan exclaves. At the age of 80, King Marco could finally crown himself king of an independent Eastern Rome with a second coronation, and ensured to give the Han a hand to increase cultural acceptance between his country's cultures. we're still 20% acceptance away from being able to hybridize the ruling Romans with our Sino subjects, but as an independent king, 7 neighboring states opted into voluntary association with Daqin and accepted vassalization without war. You didn't offer friendship, and you didn't even think to call Polo godfather, so you would sleep with the fishes while the king of Jusi accepted an invitation into our family. You fought on for less than a year and paid protection money by 1238, and only men stood in Marco's way of a men-affest destiny. Their own victory over Gan now meant that the stakes were twice as high, but Casa Nostra came prepared, captured their coastal capital, and doubled the size of the Sino-Italian state within 14 months of fighting. Rebels that remained at war with our now subjugated men were liquidated, Marco's many ministries were centralized, and at the age of 84, our king was feeling fine, and thus declared it time to found a new empire. Another, greater coronation is in order, and Daqin reigns supreme as a realm reforged. The Eastern Roman Empire, known as Daqin, called for yet another crown coronation, and Emperor Marco used this opportunity to once again ask for Han national support. This was in fact his 3rd crown ceremony in a single lifetime, and he had at last the right to don the emperor's mianfu, and his scholarly goatee exuded a newfound Confucian confidence. If Marco was to claim the mandate of heaven, he'd first need to unite China, and in 1241 AD, he ordered the invasion of the Southern Xiang dynasty. Han resistance met the power of pizza on the field of battle, and with city after city falling to Daqin occupation, the last indigenous Chinese dynasty was heading into the dustbin of history. The Polo polity had doubled in size in the space of less than a year, and half a dozen dukes begged for Rome to subjugate their home. Baba were among the rare polities that refused voluntary vassalization, and they paid for their insolence with the price of their lands given to Cisalpine hands. Time and tide will wait for no man, and unfortunately at the age of 87, Marco's geriatric condition degenerated into infirmity. Rumors within the court of Poljing openly questioned whether this pasta-mongering husk of a man could unite China before his demise, and the answer was C. With more than 51% of the Han historical homelands under Italian domination, Marco and House Polo could at last claim a new imperial dynasty, and in 1245 AD, our merchant-turned-monarch-turned-celestial deity asserted imperial hegemony and dined under heaven. The mandate of Marco gave our Polo mafiocracy the hegemony of China, a new celestial government, the title of Son of Heaven, and thousands of renown, and Daqin was thus reformed with red flags and totalitarian principles. Our spaghetti settlers had by now been almost accepted by the Chinese population, but we can't form a hybrid culture yet. Instead, we'll strengthen our capital and use our legitimacy to ensure a golden sovereignty. Golden showers also awaited our Yuan neighbors, who, instead of forming an imperial dynasty, formed only a Silk Road pit stop after a pathetic 4 months of feudal resistance. The tribes of Korea saw the writing on the urinal wall and decided to accept peaceful vassalization. At the age of 91, Marco was on death's door, but gardening and a down-to-earth disposition saved him from mortal desiccation. Forming the Hantalian hybrid culture was now a national priority before passing on the dynasty to his Polo progeny. But Marco needed 80% acceptance, and imperial examinations did little to protect his poor health, and the Wang would come for him and relieve his qi within a year.
Oh my God.
With heavy steps, Marco made the last hike of his life, and upon his return Rome decreed the creation of a new faith. Confucianity would unite the Western and Eastern worlds, and in 1250 AD, the return to Christianity with Chinese characteristics resulted in a spiritual schism that divided the realm. It is with tragic irony that with less than a fraction of a percentage until 80% cultural acceptance and the ability to form a hybrid culture that our 94-year-old Huangdi hegemon decided to die without elaboration. His humble beginnings as a merchant of Venice took him from a landless lad to the hegemon of the world's strongest state in one lifetime, and his 72 years of rule ultimately left the state in the hands of Marco II, a duke with dastardly drip and the glowing glasses of an anime villain. Marco had mounted the world and established a dynasty under heaven, and it was now time that his son and heir guide Confucianity and the country towards a path of prosperity. Marco II and his imperial family are now Huangdi of the Imperium of Sino-Spaghetti, and his skills in diplomacy are extraordinary. This sterile, backdoor, heteroflexible hegemon has 4 children and heirs, has unlimited funds to send them all to university, and possesses a drip so supreme that his Tengri neighbors consented to vassalization immediately. Polo's progeny made haste to Poljing, but in his journey back home, his lover Fang Huangli had died, and our hero's levy, both mental and literal, had broken into a flood of misery. Nearly 90,000 ducats, the largest amount of money amassed in history, were spent on repairing the realm from the flood of the Yangtze, and hopefully in the near future, the district of something would be rebuilt properly. Until then, nepotism would reign supreme as our son and heir was appointed king of the newly founded Markopolis, along with the foundation of 5 new kingdoms and 4 new empires. All of these coronations meant that our heir now had over 4,000 prestige in his first month of rule, and combined with his oversight of the river recovery, had the legitimacy and prestige needed to eat carbonara with chopsticks. The hybridization of Han and Italian combined China's ceremonious culture with a Latin heritage, Italian-speaking ruling class known as the Hantalians. With Italian trade technology and the Chinese tradition of 20 eunuchs, our heir now had access to 12 secondary wives, and even though he's sterile, he's ready to ball.
The male fantasy?
The fusion of Western and Eastern innovations catapulted our hybrid nation into the late medieval era and into the most scientifically advanced culture in the world. All of northeastern Daqin assimilated into Hantalian, and now that we have Asian innovations, we can embark on Sinicizing the state to our primary culture, though this would take 7 more years. Marco II honored his father's funeral by burning the Han treaties to erase pre-Hantalian history, and gave his father and Eastern Rome founder a proper Confucianity burial. Before embarking on a legacy of his own, Marco addressed his subjects and proclaimed that as Hantalian Huangdi, he would bring his Polo polity into a golden age of diplomacy and the unification of Western and Eastern Romes. By 1852 AD, the Hantalian hegemony of Daqin stretches from Kashgar to Korea, and if Byzantium can be considered Eastern Rome, means that we're Eastern Rome, and one of 4 Romes along the papacy and HRE. The Market of Heaven is the second most prestigious court in the world, contains the family-held kingdoms of West and South Markopolis, and is ruled from the Forbidden City and imperial capital of Polopolis, aka Poljing. House Polo believes integrity, their dynasty has unlocked full legitimacy as their legacy, and the 12 descendants of Polo live in a life of utter luxury on account of owning the richest estate in all of China. Our father, Marco, lived to be 94 years old and changed the course of Hantalian history, sowing the seeds of the over 22 counties and ruling caste that contain these hybrid Han and Italian people. Unfortunately, our combination of Confucian Christianity had not yet spread far from the coast nor the capital, and only had 25 counties of believers, or about 6% of the people in our hegemony of nearly 400 counties. The merchants of Venice had come a long way from their humble roots, and with more than 30,000 ducats in income and treasury combined, were the richest family on earth. But other strong states exist in the mid-13th century, and it's time we cover them as well. Far to the west, the islands of Britain are incredibly divided and Franken-sized among France and friends. Poland has united the Western Slavs into an empire, the less Eastern Roman Empire is more powerful than our own, and Sicily has thoroughly salted Carthago. In the newly added lands to our south, the Arabian Empire stretches from Zanzibar to Armenia and has nearly 50,000 soldiers. A Tajik mega-Iranian India has more than 50,000 soldiers, and our neighbor Mongolia has exactly 50,000 soldiers and is ruled by the Borg. We have only 25,000 soldiers and must proceed carefully, but the pagan periphery, Kambucha, and Japan are all weaker and logical targets if we continue this campaign. The only way I'll know if you want to see more Polo is if you like this video and support me by subscribing to AlzaboHD. Let me and my 12 concubine wives know in the comment box below if you want to see a Sino-Roman sequel, and you can support the channel by picking up All Under Heaven and CK3 Chapter 4 with the link on screen. This video was sponsored by Paradox Interactive, and if you'd like to support me even further, please consider becoming a channel member or a patron for bonuses like early access to future videos and your name in the credits. Population U.